you see me? Am I live? Nope. Good. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, August 19th storm forecast. My name is Brad Bergstrom, and I'm lucky enough to be the superintendent here in Sauk Rapids Rice Public Schools. I want to thank those of you who are taking time out of your evening to spend some time listening to this storm forecast. Just a couple of housekeeping items as a gentle reminder for those who have been on these Facebook Live meetings before, and for those of you who may be brand new. If you have questions, please feel free to put them into the comment section. There are people here that will be monitoring that and writing those questions down and giving them to me, and I'll take in probably about 10 minutes or so, I'll start taking those questions and trying to answer them for you. And the final piece is that just a reminder that this is an opportunity for me to get information from you in terms of your questions, for me to be able to share some of the thoughts and responses to those questions, and just a reminder for everybody to be kind to each other, because we know that this is the intent behind this is to get information out for everybody, so we greatly appreciate that. Our purpose tonight is really for me to do four things. One is to give you a brief overview of the learning model that we will be starting the school year with. Second thing is that last week I got asked a question and I said I would follow up with it, and I want to make sure I get to that. And then I want to take a little bit of time and talk about some of the common questions that I've been asked in the last week, and try to get that information out. And then finally, the last part will be for me to answer your questions. So let's start first of all with a brief overview of our learning model. At a special board meeting on last Thursday, the school board voted to have us start E12 in an in-person model on Tuesday, September 8th. We know that our early childhood will start a little bit later than that, but E12 will be starting with an in-person model. The other thing that the board did is give administration the opportunity to have what we're going to call a slower start to the school year, to kind of bring everybody back in and kind of orientate everybody to what school is now going to look like. The last time we had everybody together was back in March of 2020. And between then and now, a lot of things have changed. And so normally we do an orientation for our sixth graders at the middle school. We do an orientation for our ninth graders at the high school, which makes a tremendously large amount of sense. And because school is going to be new for everybody, for our staff, for our students, our bus drivers, cooks, custodians, and everybody else in between, we want to make sure that we take some time to help everybody understand what are the new ground rules for what school is going to look like. So if you haven't received it already, it will soon be coming to you, kind of a little bit of an orientation, what that orientation plan is going to look like. Also have some information about what open house is going to look like. That's another common tradition that lots of people look forward to, but COVID-19 is causing us to take a look at that a little bit differently. So if you haven't gotten that information yet, it will soon be coming to you. And if you haven't gotten anything by the end of the week, please reach out to your child's school to make sure that you have that information so that you can plan accordingly. So again, at the board meeting on last Thursday, the board is E12 for everybody in person, and that we're going to have a little bit of a slow start to orientate staff and students back into the buildings, and then bring everybody back in once we've had a chance to understand what the new ground rules or what the new normal is going to be for schools in Sauk Rapids Rice. Next thing I want to talk about is I got asked a question about are the face coverings latex free? And I didn't know the answer to that question, so I reached out and asked some questions. And here's what I can share with you. Our cloth face coverings are latex free. And in regards to disposable ones, at this time, there are none that have any latex in them, but we are still waiting to hear back from a manufacturer to verify that. And again, I'll follow up again next week to make sure once we get that information to be sure we're at. And I do know that as we begin to order masks and order more masks, face coverings, I will make sure that looking at that latex-free piece as being a component. So great question, and wanted to make sure I followed up with everybody on this. The next piece that I wanted to talk about is some of the commonly asked questions that I've been asked here in the last week or so, and I wanted to touch base with them. And one of those topics is ventilation. And I've had people that have asked, are things safe? Or do we have good quality air? Because of course we want to make sure that our staff and our students are safe in all our buildings. And here's what I can share with you is that the district has a good quality air ventilation systems in all of our buildings. In fact, the current system that we have in our buildings, whether it be PV, et cetera, we're going to be putting that same type of system into the new Pleasant View that's going to be opening in the fall of 2022. And so very excited about that opening coming, but the same type of system is going to be put in to PV that we currently have. So typically, districts will run their air ventilation systems as required by building codes. In the COVID-19 era, that's changed a little bit. Districts like us are choosing to go above and beyond what might be those best practices in an attempt to try and reduce the spread of COVID-19 as best we possibly can. So some of those HVAC improvements in heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, that's the words for that are HVAC. Some of the things that we're doing compared to what we might do in a normal or standard year might include, we're going to increase the amount of fresh air we're bringing into our buildings through the ventilation systems. We want to make sure that we're recycling and getting fresh air in as often as we possibly can. We're going to increase the run time in which our ventilation system is running and bringing in air per day, which again increases the amount of times that air is exchanged inside of an occupied space. We're going to run our ventilation systems on the weekends to allow more air to come in as well. Normally they'll start sometime early in the morning, run till a little later in the afternoon. They're done. We're going to run them for longer periods of time. We're also going to be running them on the weekends. Again, it's the idea to continue to try to get more fresh air in there. We're also going to regularly check and increase the replacement schedule for the filters. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that all of our systems are functioning well, which includes the filtering system, so we're going to do that. We've started the ventilation system up earlier in August than we normally would do to, again, ensure that there's adequate air ventilation that's coming into the buildings. And then we're also going to increase the monitoring frequency of our building automation systems just to make sure that they're always right. And we're going to continue to make sure that we're monitoring our systems to make sure that they're operating effectively and efficiently in order to ensure we have the safety of our staff and our students and the people who are going to be in the buildings in mind to make sure we have the safest way for our students and our community members and our staff to be in our buildings in a safe way. So just wanted to share that out with everybody that it is something that we take very seriously, and we're trying to do increase our practices to ensure that we have the safest airspace for everybody who's going to be in that building as possible. Another question that I have been asked is where does early childhood family ed and where does early childhood special education fit in to this model? And if you heard me talk a little bit earlier, I talked about it's an E12 or a pre-K through 12 base model that we're talking about. And I think I may have been a little negligent and I sometimes talk about K-12. So for our early childhood folks, if by not mentioning early childhood earlier, I do apologize for that because we do have to remember it is an early childhood through 12 system that we have here. So what's that going to look like? What is the school year going to look like there? So a couple of things that I want to make sure I share with you. And number one is that preschool and ECFE classes will follow their normal schedule time, whether we're in the district's in-person model or we're in a hybrid model. They've done a lot of things to open up spaces so that there's less chances for students to be bouncing back and forth in between models. If we have to be that way, we can have some consistency for our youngest learners and really appreciate the work and the energy that's going in by the staff and the administration there to make sure that our early childhood learners are being taken care of. Number two, preschool classrooms are being modified to allow more space and more easily with cleanable surfaces. One of the things that we've learned is that because we like to make our classrooms a very homey place, a comfortable place for our children, we bring in things that make it feel more safe. But some of those things don't work very well in a COVID-19 environment. And so we've been taking out those things that don't need to be there to maximize the amount of space, to make sure that we are providing the proper environment so we can clean it appropriately, but also the most amount of space for our staff and for our students to help out in a COVID-19 era. Wraparound care will be running at Rice Monday through Thursday, and registration is opening up through community education, so we want to make sure that our folks in Rice are aware of that. Planning for open house is to be offered September 8th through the 11th, which is a very typical piece. Usually early childhood doesn't start that first week that K-12 does. Actually, not uncommon to see them start a week later. And so more information will be coming for our families in regards to that. There will be multiple entrances getting into our spaces, and temperatures will be taken upon entering the building, just like we're doing at all our other buildings. And then finally, no outside visitors are going to be allowed in the buildings, and parents will be dropping off their students at the door, again, to try and limit the number of people coming in and out of our building. So wanted to make sure that I reached out and shared with everybody what our early childhood and early childhood special education programming is going to look like. And remember, when we talk about it being the learning model, it is an E12 model. It's not a K-12 model. The last piece that I want to talk a little bit about is face coverings. And so a couple of things that I want to make sure that I talk with everybody a little bit about. Number one is that there's been some recent information in regards to gaiters. Gaiters are those pieces that kind of wrap around your neck, and then you can pull them up and cover your nose and your face. And there was a study that was released in the last few days that talked about the viability of whether or not gaiters are an effective device to be used in face coverings. And there's been a lot of information, especially in social media, that they don't work. The plain and simple fact is that there's one study that's been done. They have some results. We have different conflicting feedback as to whether or not the study is actually saying that they don't work. I read one headline that said that wearing a gaiter is worse than having nothing at all. At this point, the CDC and the Department of Health have not given us any additional instruction in terms of whether or not they are usable. So we're going to continue to say that they are. Again, really looking at that guidance from the Department of Health in particular to help us in making sure that we're doing things the right way. We'll continue to monitor that, but again, out in social media and others, I've been hearing that they're not that they're not working, or we shouldn't be utilizing them, and we've got no direction, no feedback from the Department of Health at this time. So I wanted to make sure I brought that up. Second thing is face shields. That the CDC earlier this week came out, or I guess it was later last week, came out and talked about face shields, and the statement they're making is they do not currently recommend the use of face shields as a substitute for masks. There's been a lot of additional follow-up with that in defining what does a face shield look like. I've seen pictures of things that just kind of cover the eyes and a little bit of the nose. And at this point, the Department of Health for Minnesota has not weighed in and given us any additional direction, and that's kind of the body that we're looking to when there's some conflicting information. So at this time, face shields, we do not have anything different from the Department of Health, but we'll certainly be watching for that because that will be very important. A couple of things to remember is that face shields that wrap around the sides of the wearer's face and extend below the chin are really the best of those face shields. And that remember that with a face shield, they should be cleaned regularly, and that each time you touch them, you should be washing your hands before and after removing the face shield. Again, just a good hygiene practice. So again, one of the things that is so very complicated for us in COVID-19 is what are the rules of monopoly, as I like to say, and they are changing, they're evolving, we're learning more, and then trying to make sure that we're getting information that is factual. So again, to help out with that, I want to point out that we produced our safe learning plan for the upcoming school year. It's posted on the district website. And like other documents, we are continually updating that. And I really want to encourage our community, our staff, and our families to go and check on that on a regular basis, because we do get updated information, and there is information out there that's conflicting. And as we get confirmed factual information, we'll update our documents. And what we're going to do is we'll update those documents, and you'll see them in red. So if you look at our Safe Learning Plan and you see something that's written in red, that's been a change since the last time we updated it. And then when we do the next update, that red will become, we'll change it back to the black font like the rest of the document. And then any new changes that are coming up, you'll see those in red. And so again, just as a way to try help people understand the continuing and evolving change with COVID-19, these are a couple of tools that we're going to use to help families to understand that. Okay, so I think those were my big early questions that I wanted to make sure that I got at. And so at this time, I'm going to start getting some of the questions that are coming from some of you out in the community. So the question is, if a student is out sick for a day, can they participate in distance learning? So a couple of things. I think so let's talk about which model are we in. It's probably going to be the best way to answer that. If we are in an in-person model and there is an opportunity where the teacher is doing some streaming through Zoom, for example, for students that maybe are doing some remote learning or distance learning, that certainly could be a possibility. Distance learning does not mean that in every case that we're going to be following the exact same instructional delivery method that we are using with our in-person or our hybrid, okay? Anyways, the bottom line becomes with that is that if it's feasible and possible, absolutely, students can learn while at home, but it really depends upon what model we're in and whether or not there's some remote learning that's taking place, and the student can jump in and join that. So a question, they're stating that they're confused. Last week the kids were going back, but now I'm hearing it's a hybrid. So let's clarify this. The Board of Education clearly articulated that E12, we are going to be in an in-person model. As a part of that, the board gave administration the ability to have a slower start because, again, we're bringing all kinds of students and staff back together in a new format for what school is going to look like. And so as a part of the rollout for this, students will be not just jumping in very first day, everybody's there. We really want to take our time to orientate our students to help them to understand what the new school and the school year is going to look like. And so things will be a little different in the first 2 weeks in order to help our kids and our staff to understand what this new process is going to look like. There may be some flexible days in terms of students doing some things that are remote as well as some being in school. But part of the reason for doing that, again, is to help everybody to understand so that if at some point we do need to switch models, we have a better understanding of what that could look like. But very clearly, just make sure this is clear, we are in person for our model, and this will have a slow start, and there could be some flexibility in what those first week or two looks like depending upon the building. And that's why I mentioned earlier that there'll be information coming from the buildings to make sure that you take a look at that to see what the new schedule is going to look like. We want to make sure that we bring everybody back in a way that everybody understands what the new system, what new school will look like, and so that we make sure that we keep kids and our staff as safe as possible. Are all K-5 going 5 days a week starting on day one? The answer to that question is no. We are not going to take all of our kids with a new set of ground rules and a new set of expectations for what school is going to look like and bring everybody and drop them in one day and then try to get this figured out. I talked earlier about the whole idea of orientation and making sure that our children understand what this new system is going to look like. I talked about our 6th graders and our 9th graders in the past. We brought them in to help them to understand as they transition to a new building what that's going to look like. Well, in essence, we're all transitioning. E through 12 is going to do that. Our staff are going to be doing that. So to take our time to make sure we get this right and everybody understands what the new system, what our new school year is going to look like is important. And so no, not starting on day one, but we will build to get there over the course of time. And your building administration will be sending out communication to you in terms of what that's going to look like in your building during that first week of school. The next question is if we're in distance learning, will there be class interaction, for example, with Zoom? Yes. One of the things that we want to be able to do is to make sure that there's some interaction. How and what that looks like will depend upon the course, depend upon the grade level. But yes, we did learn across the state that when we went into distance learning last spring, that was the one piece that was really important, was the interaction. And Zoom is a tool that we have and will use in order to help with that interaction. And in a distance learning model, the interaction piece. Now, is that going to be in a full classroom? Will that be with a small group? Will that be with the teacher? I think it will depend upon the course. It will depend upon how many students are in there. And that's why I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. That's why it's so really important for us that we have parents and guardians identify for us where you're going to be at for the upcoming school year. Because we need to plan accordingly. And again, parents and guardians can choose to do distance learning if that's the best fit for them. But we need to know that, so we make sure we staff appropriately and provide the best way for us to educate our children in all the models that we could be in. How are people hearing about what the slow start means? The intent with this was it to come from each building to hear what that first week or 2 weeks is going to look like in each of the buildings. Because we understand that what elementary may need may look different from what the secondary will mean. We didn't want to have a one-size-fits-all, this is exactly the same. We wanted to give buildings the flexibility to best meet the needs of their children. And so you should be getting this information from your child's building. And again, if you haven't heard anything by Friday, please reach out to the building because my understanding was this information was going to go out either yesterday or today. Next question here is, how are you ensuring social distancing? I think it depends upon the model that we're in. If we are in an in-person model, our administrative teams and the planning that's been going on has really been to ensure social distancing to the extent possible. But we also know that if you're in an in-person model, it means the infection rate is low and that you do it to the extent possible. If you can't, for example, in a bus, ensure social distancing all the time. That we just know that that's not feasible to do that because there isn't enough buses and there isn't enough bus drivers to make that happen. So if you're in an in-person model, we do it to the best of our ability to provide those spaces for students to make sure that we social distance to the extent possible. Now, if we move into a hybrid model, it changes. It changes from to the extent possible to, yep, you have to do this. And of course, if there's fewer bodies, it becomes much easier to make that happen. But again, with an in-person model, the infection rate is low, and so there is in the planning that the governor shared with us and the ground rules and the criteria, it's to the extent possible. And there is not in an in-person model every second, every day, is it going to be where everybody's going to be social distance. It just will not work that way. But we'll do it to the extent possible to try and ensure the safety of our staff and students. Are kids sharing school supplies? The list is smaller than usual. My understanding is that no, we do not want to be sharing school supplies. This is something that is just one of the changes that we have to look at in what school looks like in 2020 compared to in years past. The sharing of supplies is something that just shouldn't be happening because we, again, trying to reduce that rate of spread to the smallest amount possible. And so, no, we should not be sharing school supplies. And again, if this says the list is smaller than usual, I trust that our buildings have asked for the supplies that are needed for your child to be successful in the school year. What about electives at the high school? If a student is in distance learning, will they be able to take culinary, robotics, etc.? That's a great question. Obviously, we want to provide all of the opportunities that we possibly can for our students to be able to take elective courses. And if there is a way in a distance learning model to make that happen, absolutely we will. And again, I'll come back to this idea of why it's so important that families fill out that survey that came to them via Skyward so that we can plan accordingly. We want to provide the greatest number of opportunities for all of our students. Obviously, there may be some classes that cannot happen in one model that they're being offered in another model. But if we have a better idea of where those needs are at, we can better plan in terms of what kinds of classes we can offer, and if we can find ways to make it work in a distance learning model that the courses are being available, we certainly will try to do that. This is time changing at any school, and I'm going to take this as are we changing the start and end times of the school day at each of our buildings. In our Safe Learning Plan, we posted the start and end times for each of our buildings. I think it's about page 4 or 5. I might be wrong with that. But my understanding is that these times are basically what we have had in years past. There might be a minute or two change. I don't know what our start times were last year, but in talking with the administrative team, those changes, if they're not exactly the same, they're within a minute or two or within a relatively short window of time to have them be the same as what they have been in years past. So I got two questions that came up, and I think they're pretty much related. I'll read both questions to them, or both questions. Number one says, who decides when to change models, and then do you switch models as superintendent or as a board? These are great questions, and at the board meeting on this coming Monday, that will be part of the conversation for the board to decide who is going to be doing that. Is it going to be the superintendent or is it going to be the board? And that conversation will take place, and we'll talk, the board will talk about it at length and make the decision on who that's going to be. A lot of districts are choosing to let the superintendent do that, but again, we'll have that conversation at the board level and then announce that to everybody so that people begin to understand not only who's going to be making the decision, but to me it's also important to talk about how that decision is going to be made, and we look to share that with our families so that they can begin to understand where things are going to be at. I think ultimately we would all love to go into the model that we start the year with and never have to change. If we could stay in this model all year long, I would be a very happy superintendent, because that would mean that COVID-19 infection rates are staying down. It means that our staff are safe. It means that our students are safe. But I think there is a likelihood that we will have to change, and I think once the decision is made in terms of who's going to be making that decision, then we'll talk about the how that's going to happen and what kind of the process is behind that, so that everybody has a clear understanding of what that's going to look like. The question is, will there be a sub shortage, and if so, will the school need to group students from more than one class together? So I'll start with the first question. Will there be a sub shortage? I would say that there has been a sub shortage for a period of time. We have fewer people going into education, and trying to find subs has been a struggle, and depending upon what part of the state you're in, that struggle can be more or less than what you find in other parts of the state. So there has been a sub shortage. I know that has been a point of conversation with our Human Resources Department in reaching out and having conversations with a subgroup to help them to see where they at, how are people feeling about that. A lot of our subs, or a number of our subs, are retired teachers, and we greatly appreciate their willingness to give back and come and be subs for us. But again, checking with them to see where they're at and how comfortable they are with that is a question. In terms of grouping them from more than one class together, that would not be a strategy that we would like to have as our go-to. Again, I've talked about this for several weeks, and that is trying to make sure that we keep groups of kids together as much as possible and not cross groups. So that if there is a COVID-19 outbreak, we can limit to who's been impacted by that. And so I wouldn't think that that would be a strategy for us to use. But speaking of subs, if you live in this community or in the region and you're watching this and you have a 4-year degree and you would be interested in coming to sub, please reach out to our Human Resources Department. We would love to explore the idea of seeing if we can make that work for you. We are also talking about trying to find some unique strategies to try and help our students help our substitutes feel safe and have them be available to come help us out if it's needed, because we know that staff get sick other than COVID-19. We know that they have doctor's appointments, they have their children that may wind up getting ill, etc. So there's always a need for substitutes, and if there are some people that would be out there that would be interested in helping out with that, we'd get a hold of our Human Resources Department. We'd love to have that conversation with you. Open house for the high school. Is open house for the high school canceled? And that's not true. It's not looking the same as what it has been in the past. There was documentation that was sent out to all of our high school families, and it kind of laid out what open house is going to look like for this upcoming year. I would refer you to that document to take a look at what the ground rules and what the expectations are going to be for that. But no, open house has not been canceled, but it is looking different. Transfer buses, yes or no? At this point, my understanding is yes, there will be transfer buses. Again, we're going to have to be very careful with what those transfer buses look like in terms of making sure we get kids as safely as possible. Again, in an in-person model, that will look different than if we're in a hybrid model. But at this time, yes, there will still be transfer buses. And if anything should change with that, we'd be sure to let you know. But my understanding is they're still going to be there. So next two questions. You guys are asking really good questions tonight. How quick will a change take place? Is it going to be a day's notice, a week notice, a weekend notice? That's a great question. The key piece to remember with this is we want to give our families time to make sure that they can make the adjustment if we need to move from one model to the next. Ideally, we'd give everybody a week's notice, and this is where it's going to be at. But there may be times when there's a spike that happens, and we have to move quicker than that. We plan to meet on a regular basis with our team to talk about how are things going in the district, how are they going in the region, what's our data telling us, and do we need to make a movement. I would foresee that movement, if we have to do that, giving our families as much time as they possibly can. But if we have a spike and things need to change, we may need to do that quicker than what we normally might like to do. I know of one district that has said to their families, you got 12 hours. You may have 12 hours notice. We would hope to give more than that, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that if we have to move quickly, we can in order to help stop the spread of COVID-19, because we want to make sure that our staff and our students are safe. And so the answer that I've been giving a lot these days is it depends, it will depend, but we will try to establish a time frame for families so that they will have enough time to make that movement. But if a spike does happen and it comes quickly, we may need to move quicker than what we might normally want to do, which leads me to another point that I would like to talk with our families about. And it is not my intention to sound anything other than just trying to be helpful here. And I talked earlier about the fact that we might be moving models throughout the course of the year. Again, if we were to stay an in-person model all year, that would be amazing. But I think that there's a likelihood we'll have to move. And because of that, I think it will be important for families during this time leading up to school to, as best as they can, to be making those arrangements so that if we have to move from in-person to hybrid, that plan can be executed for you in a timely fashion. Again, we want to give families as much notice as we possibly can. And at the end of the day, I think we'll be able to do that in most situations if we have to move. But if we have a spike and we have to move quickly, I think having those plans in advance and knowing that they're going to have to move sometimes quicker than what we'd like to do will be fundamentally important to help our children transition through the change that might happen if we move from one program to the next. And whether that's moving to a more restrictive environment or it's moving to a less restrictive environment. The next question is, how are we dropping off medications? And I think that is an amazing question, and I don't have the answer for that right now. And so one of my follow-up questions for next week is really going to be what's going to be the strategy for dropping off medications. And so I will reach out and I'll talk with our team about that and try to get that information for you for the next meeting that I have with you. What's that? So the next question is a great question, a great clarifying question. And I made a statement earlier that if you've got a 4-year degree and you'd be interested in subbing, please let our HR department know. And the question is, does it have to be in education? And the answer to that is no. Any 4-year degree, we can get you a substitute license, actually called a short call sub license, so that you can come and sub. So what the degree in doesn't matter. What is important is that you have a 4-year degree, and we can get you that short call sub license, which will allow you to sub on a daily basis for us. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. There's some ground rules with that, but for the most part, coming day to day and wanting to sub, if you have a 4-year degree, we can get you that short call sub license. And we would certainly like to have that conversation with you, because we can take all the help that we can get. Will teachers for distance learning be outsourced? And I guess I can take this question in a couple of different ways, so I'll try to see if I can answer that in both directions. First of all, there has been no conversations about taking our staff and having them do distance learning for other districts. We may be doing some things internally. So we may have students who are at Rice Elementary and Mississippi Heights Elementary and Pleasant View, that they may be in all 3 of those buildings. They might be 3rd graders, and they might have a teacher from Mississippi Heights. So yes, they might not have a specific teacher from their building, but they will have somebody from our district. As far as going out and getting somebody else to come and teach our distance learning classes, we've had no conversations about that. While I'm a little biased in my opinion, I happen to believe that our teachers are some of the best that you're ever going to find, and we want to utilize them to work with our kids as much as we possibly can. So the idea of taking them to somebody else really has not even been a point of conversation, but we at the elementary level, your child may be in one building and have a teacher from another building if you're in the distance learning model, and that's highly likely. If a student is put on quarantine, can the student distance learn? And the answer to that question is yes. The thing to remember is that students and families can choose to go from, if we're an in-person or a hybrid model, they can go to distance learning at any time. And depending upon how the courses are being offered that the student has, distance learning may be the best option in order to help that student with their learning. The thing to remember is once we make that move into distance learning, to come back into a hybrid or in-person, depending upon where we're at, we'll be looking at those common breaks, such as example that comes to my mind is at the end of a trimester. We can't be having students moving back and forth between distance learning and in-person or hybrid, and we need to plan accordingly. We need to staff accordingly. Again, governor's made it very clear you can move from in-person or hybrid into distance learning at any time, but to come back, that's up to the districts, and we're saying at a common break, such as at the end of a trimester. If you are doing distance learning, will you still have open house to see teachers? The answer to that question is, I believe, is yes. What that might look like might be very different. And again, the buildings are working through some of the details with that, and we'll be sharing that information with families. But I think having some sort of an opportunity to meet with the teacher ahead of time, if that's feasible, I believe that we'll be trying to find opportunities to do that. Just give me 1 second here with this. Hold on.
It's the school supplies they ordered. It was a package.
Okay.
Building.
Okay. It's called impacts? Okay. Sorry about that. I needed to get some clarification with this. Again, I'm learning a lot of what's going on in the community or in our district as well. I've been here 7 weeks and the learning curve is still pretty steep, but we'll get there together, right? So will the impacts be available at open house? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would highly suggest that you reach out to the building and ask that question, and they'll be able to answer it for you. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here because I've noticed myself saying some things here tonight very different than maybe what I've been sharing with you in previous meetings. And that is, you'll notice I'm talking a lot about the buildings. And we've reached that point where the base model decision has been made, and we are moving now into communication and what the school year is going to look like from the buildings. And so really starting to direct a lot of those questions back to the buildings so that we make sure that we're getting you the most accurate information. Again, I know that if it hasn't come out, it soon will be coming out, information about back to school, pictures, all of those things that are going to be in that documentation. And I really want to make sure that I don't misspeak. Because things could be subtly different in each building. So if you notice tonight, I'm directing people a lot more to go back to the buildings. That's a very specific purpose and design because I want to make sure that you're getting the most accurate information. And when it gets to some of that granular level at the building level, I want to make sure that you get that information from the best source possible. And that might not be me. The question asks, will there be specialized classes for advanced learners? I would say that we will continue to run our classes that we have normally run as long as we have student enrollment for them, as we have had in the past. What will that look like in a distance learning model? Might look a little different, but in terms of specialized classes for advanced learners, if we've had them, we'll continue to run them. If we plan to run them, I would say that we're going to continue to do that. I've mentioned a couple of times, just a reminder about completing the survey that came out in Skyward. I would be remiss if I didn't share and say thank you to those of you that have. Some of you got after that, answering that question right away, and we greatly appreciate that. I know we're going to try reaching out to families, making phone calls, etc. But again, if you haven't done this yet, if you can do it as soon as possible, it really helps us with the planning. And for those of you that have already done that, thank you very, very much for doing that. It really is helpful, and again, thanks for doing that. So this question is that if your student is sick for a day or two, this is a great point. We need to remember, if children are not feeling well, we need to keep them at home. The days of both for adults and for students, there's kind of a little badge of honor, especially in the Midwest, where I'll fight through this and I'm going to come to work, or I'm going to go to school and I'll do that. And we really, really have to understand that if a child is sick, or if an adult is sick, we need to stay at home to prevent that illness from coming into the building, now more so than ever before. If you're sick for a day or two, you don't need to think about flipping into a distance learning plan. You don't need to think, oh, do I have to make that move? It's not like if you miss a day, you have to do that. If there's going to be an extended period of time, I think that involves a conversation with the child's teacher or the building administration to see what might be the best plan. Again, children have been getting sick and missing some school for many, many years. That's not going to change. What will change is making sure that we're not sending kids to school that are sick, and it's not a badge of honor to come to work sick. And number two is that if it's a day or two, things should be just fine. But if it's going to be for an extended period of time, a conversation with the teacher or the building administration to see if something needs to be done differently is what I would advise. Oh, this just warms my heart. Can we donate supplies and Clorox wipes? The answer to that question is yes. We would be more than happy to take donations for supplies and Clorox wipes. Those are the kinds of things that can be very helpful for us. So please, I got a question being asked of me, so I'll answer this one first. So please feel free to reach out to your child's building, or if you're a community member, reach out to a building of your choice where you think it might be best needed, and let them know. We've got schools in Rice, we've got schools in Sauk Rapids, and so let's make sure that if you're willing to donate, let's just reach out to one of the buildings, and they'll point you in the right direction in terms of what that'll look like. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to do that. I talked earlier when I first started doing these that schools and communities have always been linked together. And sometimes it's activities, it's uses of the building, etc. Well, in a pandemic, we have a linking of close together that is probably truly unique and different than ever before. But together, if we work to make sure that we are doing the right things to keep our community safe, if we're helping each other out, together we'll get through this. And in the end, our children and their education will continue to move forward, and our staff will be able to do so in a safe environment, which is critically important as well. This question is, will all distance learners in elementary for a grade level be in a class together? And I think the answer to that is it depends. If the number of students in a grade level is a workable and usable, that makes sense for us to educate the children in a distance learning model, yes, it could be. If it doesn't make sense and we have to break it up into two groups, we will certainly do that. It just depends upon the number of students that are in need of distance learning and what makes sense for us in a distance learning model in order to meet the needs of all of the students. This question is, are we dropping school supplies off with open house or our first day of school? I don't know the answer to that. I would suggest that you reach out to the buildings. If it's not in the documentation that is sent out by the buildings, which it could very well be, please check that. If it's not there, then reach out to the buildings to find out how they would like to have you do that. Is there going to be grace given for those who are missing more than recommended amount of days due to illness? I think the one thing that COVID-19 has taught us is that there's not absolutes. Because just when we think, yep, this is a plan, this is how it's got to be, then it changes and you have to adapt to it. I think the other thing it's taught us is really the importance of communication, hence the reason why I'm doing these meetings here on a weekly basis. It's really important that we have ongoing and consistent education or communication so that our education for our students can continue to go forward. So when we talk about those who may be missing more than the recommended amount of days, that really should involve a conversation with your child's teacher and or the building administration. I can see there's going to be situations where a student's going to miss more than a number of days, and it's perfectly normal, and we've got some things going on that explain where it's at. We have students that have missed more than the recommended number of days prior to COVID-19. And what works well is when there's communication between the family and the school, and together that the situation gets resolved. So to this question, it's really going to be, I think the grace is, can we communicate and reach out and explain where things are at? And sometimes we might not always agree where things are at with that, but the communication and understanding where things are at so that we can figure out what's the best solution for the child. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. What's the best solution to help our children learn? And the communication that happens if children are going to be gone for a period of time is critically important so that the teacher can help the family to understand what are those needs and what do they need to do. Will custodial staff increase due to increased need for cleaning? I think there's a couple of things that come with that. Number one is there's definitely going to be an increase in need for cleaning. And I think part of that comes with the way we choose to do things. And is technology going to be a help for us with this? And we have purchased and will continue to look to purchase items that will allow us to clean effectively larger spaces that need to be cleaned with fewer numbers of bodies. And again, technology and devices and machinery can help us with that. Will there be some increase in staffing? I would suspect so, because we know that we want to make sure our buildings are safe and clean and sanitized to the best of our ability. But I think it's some combination of increasing in terms of the number of either hours people are working or the number of people that we may be employing, but it's also finding new ways, new systems, new processes for cleaning so we can use the same number of people and clean a larger amount of space in a safe and secure manner. Will the teacher be teaching both in person and hybrid at the same time? Well, we won't have in-person and hybrid at the same time. Could a teacher be teaching in a hybrid model to their students in remote learning and also in the classroom at the same time? Yes, that could definitely be a possibility. Again, looking at what the course is being offered, looking at what makes sense to have this happen and take place. Those will be the kinds of conversations that have been happening at the building level. And again, this information will be shared from the buildings in terms of what that's going to look like. And again, I'll come back to, there's not an absolute. It's only going to be done this way. There will be different ways in which this can be approached depending upon the age of the learner, depending upon the content area that's being taught, and depending upon whether or not we have a few bodies that want a course or there's a number of people that want a course. And I'm confident that our teachers and our administration will come up with a plan that best meets the needs of all learners. And if we try something and it's not working, I'm also confident that we'll adjust to make it work for students to the best of our ability. Will regular COVID tests be required to make sure people don't have COVID? Testing at this time is something that we will be following the Department of Health in terms of their recommendations for who has to go get tested, depending upon information that we share with them in terms of how things are going in the building. We do not have the capacity or the authority to direct people to go do COVID testing. That will come from either public health or that'll come from the Department of Health. There are some regional teams that are being set up around the state from the Department of Education to help us in dealing with if there are COVID issues that surface in our community, and we'll be taking that direction from them. So again, COVID testing being required by the school, we will not be doing that. We'll be following our guidance and taking our direction from the Department of Health and Public Health. This is a really good question. If a case is reported, does that automatically move everyone to distance learning, or would in-person continue? One of the things that we learned this summer is that the more we can keep a group of people together and isolated from other groups, the less impact it has on programming overall if there is an active COVID case. The fact that face coverings are a requirement, the fact that we're trying to limit the number of students who are interacting, that then allows MDH to give us direction in terms of staying in the current model that we're in because it has the fewest amount of impact on people. The more mixing that happens, the more that we don't follow the rules, the more that we don't wear the face coverings properly, those kinds of things, it could lead us to having a larger impact in terms of moving from one model to another. But it is not an automatic that if a case is reported, that everyone is going to go to distance learning. The next question is, how stringent are the rules? Runny nose, sneezing, kids have allergies. Absolutely they do. And the key thing to remember is that the Department of Health is constantly updating what are those guidelines for COVID-19. And the thing to remember is it's 2 or more. So a student with a runny nose or a student who is sneezing in and of itself is not, oh my goodness, they have COVID and we have to get them out of here. If there are multiple symptoms, we will be checking to see, okay, maybe we need to. But again, at the end of the day, it's not just if it's this, then all these things, then this is going to happen. Because we do understand that allergies, I have some of them myself. And so we know that when it's allergy season, that noses are going to run, people are going to sneeze. But again, face coverings done properly, keeping our groups of kids together in a group as much as we possibly can will limit the impact that we have if something of a COVID-19 case is brought into the building. If your child starts in distance learning and then goes back to in-person, will they have the same teacher? And I think that's my favorite answer, right, is it depends. I think depending upon if a child is in a general education classroom and they're moving from distance learning into an in-person model, the likelihood that they're going to have the same teacher is probably pretty low. Especially if we've got a teacher that is dedicated to helping a group of students with the distance learning. I could see some examples at the secondary level in particular where there are some unique classes that maybe are being offered daily through a remote process, and then when they go back to in-person, they would certainly have that teacher. Special education might be an example of there's some things happening remotely with a special education teacher, and when they come back in person, they possibly could. Again, it's not an automatic, it's not a given, but I think there will be some cases in which the teacher will be different. I also think there will be some cases where that teacher could wind up being the same. This question is, will sixth grade have an open house, i.e. like ninth grade? Again, that information will be coming from the building level. I encourage you to look for that information. If it hasn't come, it will be coming soon. And if it just reach out to the building and see if that information has been sent. Because if it has been sent, you should have it. And if you didn't get it, check with them to make sure that it was sent to the right, the communication came to the right address for you. Oh, well, I've just been informed that it's 8 o'clock. I've been having so much fun here with everybody. The time is just flying. I think it's actually 8:01. Wow, this is fun. Anyways, thank you everybody for joining me tonight. I hope that I've been able to answer some of your questions. I noticed that I have a bit fewer questions tonight than what I've had in the past. So hopefully our documentation that we're sharing with you is getting to you and helping to answer some of your questions. Again, please check with our Safe Learning Plan on a consistent basis. When we get updates from the CDC, the MDH, or MDE, we will continue to update those, and we want to make sure that you're checking that out on a regular basis. So the other thing is that parents and guardians, if you filled out the survey in Skyward for us, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Greatly appreciate it. If you haven't, if you could take the time to do that, the longer it takes for us to get this, the less time we have to plan, and the less time we have to get that information out to parents and guardians, and we want to do that in as quick fashion as we can. And again, if you or someone you know has a 4-year degree, and it can be any 4-year degree, and you would be interested in subbing, please reach out to our Human Resources Department. We'd love to have that conversation with you. I think that's it for this edition of Storm Forecast. My plan is to continue to do these up and through the start of the school year, as long as we have people that are asking questions. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thank you for everything you're doing to keep our community safe. And have a great rest of your week, and go Storm.